All right, guys, so I just went long on obesity. I had a prior video on Novo Nordisk. So if you haven't go watch that, maybe check it out. But I already have shares of Novo, but after the last 2 days, it dropped about 25, close to a third of its market cap was shed because they lowered their full year 2025 guidance to like not a crazy amount. So they're still growing. They're just saying it's not as much as we expected, and it's because of two reasons. The illicit, compounded, some people call them knockoff weight loss drugs that are essentially illegal, but there is a legal loophole, whereas if you personalize the medicine for people, you can still issue them. But that's one reason. Those are basically flooding the market, and they're a headwind for both Eli Lilly and Novo. It's not just Novo because cheaper prices, like unregulated, compounded knockoff drugs, you can see why those can flood the market and take market share from both of these two giants, right? The second reason is competition, right? Novo still has the blockbuster drugs for obesity, right? Ozempic and Wegovy. But Eli Lilly has been creeping up really fast, and they're doing a great job, actually. So I'm not like bearish Eli Lilly. I'm not picking Novo over Eli Lilly. I just think Novo is very undervalued. So they're trading at around like 14 times their earnings, and Eli is trading at like 66 times their earnings, right? Even though Novo, which let me show you guys here. So Novo makes more money than Eli Lilly, but is only like a third of Eli Lilly's market cap still, right? So their last quarter, they had 37% profit margins, and they made $4 billion in net income, like profits. And for the year of 2024, 34% profit margins, almost 35. Top line revenue was 42 billion, and they pocketed 14.65 billion, right? So remember that 42 billion revenue, 14.6 profits. Whereas Eli Lilly, which is like 3 times bigger, in 2024, made 45 billion in revenue, which is similar, but they made 4 billion less in profits, right? So why is the market so much more excited about Lilly than Novo? There's some, it's not completely unjustified. Like they can be bullish on Eli Lilly. They've been, catching up and close to being a leader in GLP, but Novo is more profitable, and they're still growing their blockbuster weight loss drugs, right? So I just think right now it's an undervalued company, and that's why I love when the sentiment is terrible around a company, even though it's still growing, still profitable, still a great business, right? So that's what I think of Novo. Now, if we look at the last like 2 days, it's almost down 30%. It basically shed a third of its market cap just because 2025 guidance dropped from, I have the numbers somewhere, but it basically dropped to the low teens, right? So that means they're still growing in the low teens, which is really good. Let me pull up, where did I put it? Somewhere here. I think this is, so if you don't know what price to earnings is, it's basically, let's say you have a business, right? And you're making $1 million of profit per year. You wouldn't value that business at $1 million because you can make that back in a year. So if you're trying to sell that business, you wouldn't want to sell it for $1 million because you can just hold it and you'll make that $1 million back in a year, and you'll make another $1 million next year. Probably if you're growing, you'll make $1.2 million. Year after that, you'll make $1.4 million, et cetera, right? So companies trade at multiples for this reason. So if you're making $1 million in profits, you would put a multiple on it, let's say 10x, right? So you could buy it, you would sell it for $10 million because if it's growing, you'll make $1.2 million next year. In 5 years, maybe you'll make $3 million, et cetera. All right. So this multiple for Novo is basically lower. No, not basically, it is lower. It was back before they had these blockbuster weight drugs, before Ozempic and GLP-1s really blew up and created this obesity market, which is crazy. So this is basically, if you don't want to think in terms of like financial terms like PE, think of this chart as an excitement meter around the company. So people are less excited today about the future of this company than they were before the obesity drugs even kicked in, right? So this is going back to like 2016. Back in 2016, why would the market be more excited than it is today when they have these blockbuster drugs that are like 57, 60% of their revenue that just blew up, and they're still growing? Like, yeah, they're not growing as fast, but that's normal when you have a new market, competitors, et cetera. Speaking of this new market, let me go to the GLP-1 market estimates. So the pie. So the reason I am bullish is because, yes, there's competition for sure. There's, maybe right now it's temporary, but these compounded knockoffs are flooding the market and taking market share away from both of these companies. But today, this market is, I think, like $50 billion. Okay. It is set to triple by 2030 in the next 5 years. So the pie is going to grow 3 times bigger by 2030. So even if Novo's market share is getting chipped away by competitors or whatever, the pie is going to be 3 times bigger. Even if they lose a couple percentage points every year, because the pie is growing so much, it's like one of the fastest growing markets, they're still set to make a ton of money. They're going to print money. And I think the Wegovy patent expiration isn't until like 2032 anyway, but they're essentially still a money printer, right? And a profitable one at that. Speaking of drugs, both Eli Lilly and Novo have even better weight loss drugs in clinical trials right now. I think they're like phase 3. So they're set to come online like in 2026 or 27. And they're going to replace the current like Ozempic or Eli Lilly's Zepbound or Zepatide, et cetera. So they have like 2.0 drugs, both of them coming out in the next like 12 to 24 months. And there's also speculation around that, like which one's going to be better, blah, blah, blah. But I think at the end of the day, the reason that I just threw 10K in long-term call options, so one contract is for September 2026 with a strike price of 55. I put 5.5K in that. And the other position is for January 2027, and I put another 5.6K in that. And I'll show you the expected upside here as well. So let me pull up option strat. So here is my logic, right? Okay, so for the first one, which is for September 2026, a little over a year from now, at 55 strike. So we were at literally $70 per share 2 days ago, right? So even if that's the case, and in 1 year, we just get back to those levels, that's an 87% gain, right? Even if I held these the entire time for a year and 2 months or whatever, it'll be an 87% gain. Now, I think it's enough time for the sentiment to kind of turn around a bit, because that's one of the main reasons. I think opportunity lies when the sentiment is just really, really bad in a company. And this chart, shows it. The price to earnings, the multiple that the market is putting on Novo is at like 10-year lows, which makes no sense to me, right? I would understand if they were just like completely falling off a cliff. Ozempic, Wegovy, all those sales were just straight downwards, but we can check those out as well. So if we go to financials here on FinChat, go to segments and KPIs, put Ozempic on the chart and put Wegovy. Obviously they have other drugs as well, but I think these are 2 blockbuster ones, right? So if I hide the price to earnings, and okay, so this is the yearly chart for Ozempic, was approved around this time, and you can see the growth. So in 2018, revenue was $1.8 billion. It wasn't. Let me switch to USD. So it was $300 million, right? In 2018, Ozempic's annual revenue. Today, it is the last 12 months, it's almost at 20 billion. So from 300 million to 20 billion, that is an insane growth rate. Now, if we go and for Wegovy, that got approved in 2021, that really kicked off this market, as most people would say. Started with $200 million in annual revenue, and now it's at 10 billion. It's up and to the right. Now, if we go like more granular and go quarterly, it's still up and to the right. But some people, I guess the market is thinking, okay, well, it's not still growing like it was, around COVID time, right? Which was really insane up into the right growth. But that is because like the shortage reasons, which I mentioned in my last video, et cetera, et cetera. But these are still cash cows. These are quarterly metrics, by the way. So that's almost 5 billion per quarter in revenue for Ozempic and 2.5 billion per quarter for Wegovy. So like I said, this is still a growing business. Sure, it could slow down and go sideways for a little bit, but I think the sentiment is just crazy. So if we overlay the price to earnings, which again is like the excitement around this company, it has gone down for the entirety of the last year and a half, which is insane because if you look at the growth, right, and this is just quarterly, let's go to annual. If you look at the growth, it's up and to the right. So this inverse here of these 2 indicators is kind of like a switch for me to be bullish. So that is essentially, just want to update you guys on my Novo thesis, because I saw some people were going back to the old video in the last 2 days after this crazy drop. Yeah, so I'm not just looking at the last all-time high and be like, okay, the usual retail brain is like, we just need to get back to all-time highs. I'm looking at like a little deeper. I also read like a 50-page report from Morningstar a little earlier, this one right here. And it mirrored a lot of the things that I'm kind of saying. They went a little deeper, of course, to like the Medicare laws that are being passed and how that could affect insurance and profit margins, et cetera. But I won't go into all that. At the end of the day, I'm taking this position. I know there is risk, of course, but that's why I went so far out in terms of my call options. I also have shares of Novo, just plain shares. But yeah, essentially I'm betting on the revert to mean for the sentiment, if anything, because when it's like a snowball effect, right? When the sentiment gets bad, it seems like every headline just makes it worse and worse and worse. And then at some point, the sentiment becomes way worse than the actual fundamentals of the business. I'm not saying they don't have competitors. I'm not saying any of that. I'm not saying they're the best of the best of the best or better than Eli Lilly by a mile. But all I'm saying is I think it's just undervalued. based solely on the business, right? The profitability, the margins, and the growth. Even if it's slower growth than what the market wants, it's still a growing business that is a cash cow with crazy margins. I mean, 35% margins the last year. If we look at the analyst estimates for revenue and EPS the next like 3 years, it's also up and to the right. So yeah, that is my take. That is my update on Novo. Like I said, I also have shares. I'm not like all in on this by any means, but you know, I look at it as a little asymmetric bet on the reverse. Plus, this GLP market, guys, I don't think is going away. I mean, obesity is still like obesity treatment is still in the early stages, and that's why the market is set to grow 3x in the next 5 years, which is insane. If you know anything about like compounded annual growth rate, the pie is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So that is my take. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you have an opposing view, let me know. I don't want this to be an echo chamber, but that is my update. See you guys.